We're in the Fox Theater in downtown Riverside, California. As a kid, we would come, they would show like kids' movies, etc. And so, you know, when I was, what, 8, 10, 12 years old, we would come here to the Fox. I was born and raised here, been here my entire life. Well, of course, it goes back several thousand years with the local Indians here, and we have a number of groups that were in this area. Really not one too specific because we're right along the river, and so a lot of groups used that river for their own sustenance. So we had the Cahuilla Indians, we had the Serrano Indians, we had what they themselves called the Tongva. In historical records it was the Gabrieleño, because they were part of the San Gabriel mission. Luiseno Indians also too. And that goes back probably in the 9,000 to 10,000 year range for here. When you start talking about non-Indian settlement, that really starts in the 1770s when a number of the Spanish explorers are coming through the area, and then that's later supplanted by the Mexican times here, which is then of course supplanted by the American annexation of California starting in 1850 when we could become a state. We had kind of this perfect storm of a number of things that are coming together at this time. 1870s, 1880s, we've got the railroads coming to here. Obviously, California is on the far west end of the country, and most everybody lives in the Midwest and back east. So in order to get out here, the government subsidizes the railroads to come out. So that's one big thing, because that becomes more comfortable for people to come out here. The climate is another one. We've got a very unique, what was called Mediterranean type of climate out here. And so it was like going to Italy or Greece or what have you, but you could stay here in the United States. And so the climate is making a very big factor at a time when, of course, this is the Industrial Revolution. We have factories in our cities back east that are belching a lot of smoke, and people are getting a lot of lung ailments. And unfortunately, with like TB and stuff, at this time, all the doctors could do would be to listen to your chest and say, you're sick, you need to get out of here and get to a more dry or arid climate. And so this is drawing a lot of people out here who are hoping to get the TB or asthma or bronchitis baked out of their lungs. So there's that factor. There's the agricultural factor. We have a lot of land available here, and if you're young, you live in New England, you want to be a farmer, as most people did. Unfortunately, they couldn't, because most of the land was in landed families at the time. But you could come out here, you could homestead for virtually free, or you could buy fairly cheap land and set up a farm and farm it. The last factor that was coming into play was really kind of this new love or new romance of our Spanish and Mexican past. And it was brought about by the publication of a novel called Ramona. And Ramona was really supposed to be the Uncle Tom's Cabin for the California Indians. The woman who wrote it was Helen Hunt Jackson, and she really wanted to sort of highlight the plight of the Indians, just like Uncle Tom's Cabin did with the slaves. Unfortunately, what happened was that she died within just a few months of its publication, and she had written such glowing accounts of what Southern California was like, at least in her vision. You know, it's always a sun-drenched landscape. Everything's either in fruit or bloom. We get these images of the peaceful Indians working for the Padres and the like. And that's quite a draw, too, to people who want to come out here when they read, oh my goodness, it's always springtime out here. Is that true? And they come out. So between trying to rediscover our Spanish past, our health concerns, our agricultural opportunities, and now we have railroads that can bring people out fairly quickly, cheaply, and easily, we start to see a huge population boom here in the 1870s and more so in the 1880s. But by 1873, we discover what became the Washington Navel Orange. And this was an orange that had come from Brazil through to Washington, D.C., and the folks at the USDA really didn't know what to do with it. They sent some of them to Florida. They didn't work well. And so we had a woman here named Eliza Tibbetts with connections at the USDA, and she said, you know, send them out here, let's see what they can do. And almost immediately we glommed onto the fact that this was a perfect location for them, and this was a perfect type of crop. The oranges were large, they were sweet, they were seedless, and they had a fairly thick skin. Because again, most people live back east, so if we're going to grow a bunch of these, we've got to be able to get them to Cleveland, Washington, Boston, wherever. And so this was almost an immediate success, and it's something that really kind of bloomed very, very quickly, because being a seedless orange, it has to be grafted. And so you can graft hundreds from just a couple of trees, and then next year you can graft thousands, etc. So by the early to mid 1880s, we were exporting hundreds, if not thousands, of boxes of very valuable oranges, again, out to the Midwest, Chicago, Boston, that area too, and making quite a bit of money off of them. And this continued to grow really through the 1930s then, and with the advent of a number of different other industries with it, we became a very, very wealthy community very quickly. In fact, by 1895, this is just 25 years after Riverside started, we had the highest per capita income in the country. And it was because of those navel oranges. A lot of people were making a lot of money off of them. After World War II, of course, we saw the normal decline in that, and at this point now, the citrus industry kind of gives way to suburbanization, which is happening really nationwide. Cities are starting to decentralize and move to the suburbs, and Riverside is very much part of that. We're tearing up some of the orange groves, planting houses instead of orange trees, and the city becomes decentralized. And so downtown starts to deteriorate. We have additional shopping areas outside of downtown that are coming on, along with all these suburbs. And this is really happening really region-wide in Southern California. Huge housing shortage after World War II. Guys are coming back. A lot of them had been in the Pacific Theater in the tropics, and they like the warm climate, so they don't necessarily want to go back to Detroit or Chicago and have to deal with winters again. So they're coming out here into the Sun Belt, and especially Southern California, with their VA loans to buy a new suburban house somewhere outside of downtown here, just like in many other cities. And so we see a huge shift in land use, a shift in our agricultural base. We get more industry in here, as opposed to growing of the citrus, et cetera. And there's really just kind of a major shift going on here in population and land use here in Riverside. We really start to see it quite a bit starting in the 70s and 80s out here, because as LA and Orange County fill up and land becomes scarcer, it necessarily moves east, and it continues to move east even today. So really the much bigger boom happens in the 80s and 90s, when we see a lot of houses, a lot more houses being built out in this area. And this really becomes the dominant land use out here at this point. Unfortunately, what we end up with is a system where we have most of our jobs are actually in the LA and Orange County area, but most of our homes are out here in the inland area. So people necessarily have to get up early, commute in, and commute back there. It's not to say we don't have industry and jobs here, but there's quite a few of them in the LA Orange County area, and so people commute in, not only from here, but also from the other towns here in the inland area. Riverside is well, I guess you'd call it a medium-sized city. We're about 325,000 people. Again, like I said, we're in the Inland Empire. We've got a very varied population. We go from the high socioeconomic level down to the low. As far as demographics are concerned, we pretty much run the gamut. Between the Anglo-Americans to Hispanics, which are a large part of the population, African Americans, et cetera, very large part of the population too. So I think we kind of mirror a lot of Southern California. We're becoming a denser community now. Suburbanization is giving away more to urban land uses as the population continues to grow. So when we look out downtown here now, we're seeing a lot more loft and apartment type of developments that are coming in, multi-story things, which you would not have seen here very, very regularly back in the day. So we're seeing a lot of that. There's a younger population that's coming in too. Apparently we were one of the big attractions for the millennial crowd out here. And so we're getting a lot more land uses and businesses that cater to that demographic too. But we're seeing more urban land uses come into even a suburban setting then. I hope they walk away with a sense of what it was like and what the people were like who came out here when this was pretty much a barren plain, as it was described as, and were able to set up a town, set up other towns, build a railroad to bring people out here, and what they had to do in order to do that. We think, people back then were tougher. In a lot of ways they were. They gave up their homes wherever they were, and they came on out here to an area, it's described in diaries as basically a desolate plain. What am I going to eat? Where am I going to get water, et cetera? And they made it work. And they got their hose in the ground, and they dug the trenches for the water. They subdivided the land, and they brought other people out here and made it work. The major thing is that Riverside was really the seat of the naval orange industry, and we kind of added to not only our own growth but others, because of course we exported those. And so this really put us on the map. And when people think of Riverside today, it's more thought of as a sleepy inland community, but this was really a hub of activity at the time, and was for many, many years. And people made it a point to come out here then. That's of course given way in a lot of degrees to other uses and other businesses and other demographics necessarily, but that's where our roots are.